Hey everybody, this is Zephaniah Francois, the founder of Kingdom Child and the creator of Share for Him and Her. And I am here to talk more about emotional and experiential language, right? Always get a little tongue twisted over there. So I hope everybody's doing okay. I have my notes with me. And today I really want to, anytime I do these videos, y'all, I'm practicing, okay? I'm practicing because I'm fully persuaded that I will be advocating. And what it will look like for me is teaching or just outreach or whatever capacity that God decides to use me in. I just strongly believe that I need to be prepared. So anytime I do these videos, this is me um, operating from love, trusting, practicing, because public speaking is not my strong point. But anyway, let's jump right in. If you are part of my community, I want to say hello. Hope y'all are doing well. If you're not, I hope that you join. Here we talk about all things pertaining to emotional health. If you're a human being, if you have emotions, I'm advocating for you. I'm also advocating for love because love is the story of my life. And EEL is a framework that is rooted in love that I designed, which is my testimony and translation. And what it is it's the idea of supporting you, exercising ownership of your identity, right? And when it comes to living emotionally healthy, I truly believe that personal responsibility is the first step, right? So before we can exercise ownership, we have to take responsibility, meaning we have to make a conscious decision, right, about ourselves. And so that's why it's personal responsibility. So in this particular class, pardon me as I get my flow. I'm going to slow down so I can get my flow. But I have my whiteboard because this is EEL class 104. And, we have to start from somewhere, right? So when you think of emotional health, a lot of times we go straight to labels. We go straight to mental health. We kind of go to a lot of places. But we don't necessarily hone in on personal responsibility. We don't necessarily hone in on what accounts for emotional health, what it looks like. And so I am here to facilitate awareness that when it comes to emotional health, everything matters. We got to put everything on the table. And if we're going to put everything on the table, then we got to have a starting point, right? And so, where did we get this from? The other thing, y'all, I want to practice how much I can stop saying because I literally just do it. I don't know why. So y'all don't judge me if you hear me saying because I really am trying to stop that. But I was about to say it. So moving right along, I did it again. So moving right along, y'all, we have to have a starting point. Genesis. So okay, this is me, I'm interjecting in my own teaching. EEL is rooted in scripture. And so I say that to say that the word of God is always facilitating our awareness around something. And the why is so that we can reciprocate, so that we can reflect that back, right? And so that is what a right relationship with love looks like, right? So from the beginning of time, Genesis, love was already here, already existed, right? And so that is just kind of information that is establishing where this is coming from. The idea of me even saying we have to have a beginning. Because remember, everything matters, right? So I'm really doing my best to try to connect the dots. So that is where we get the idea of our origin from Genesis, right? We didn't create the world, we came into the world. So that would be our origin. But the beginning of the world is Genesis. So our capacity, like this is where we develop our capacity, right? And our beginning, our origin. So I hope that makes sense. So in the beginning, love, our beginning, origin, and this is where we discover emotions, experiences, and information, because that is what is filling our person, right? So in essence, we have two baselines that we operate from. One, we have to make a conscious decision around, because this was already here. When we come into the world, our beginning, our origin, we are being filled with emotions, experiences, and information. But we're not filled with love. Love is something that we discover. So the reason why this is important is because it leads us to the idea of how our identity is formed. And the reason why our identity is important is because that is how we operate. Right? And so our identity is dynamic. Our identity is something that's evolving in either direction, right? So is that, we could be evolving towards our best selves, or we could be evolving in the other direction, right? At any rate, something is happening within our identity, always, right? Why? Because we've already established the idea of emotions, experiences, and information. That's universal. Doesn't matter what background, doesn't matter what you believe in. We all navigate our reality through experience, and every experience activates an emotion, right? So our emotions are always present. Doesn't matter if you're white, black, Spanish, yellow, purple, rich, poor. Information. We live in an information world. In essence, everything is information, data, right? So again, I'm just highlighting something that we can all relate to, because EEL, emotional and experiential language, is a framework model for everyone, whether you believe in Jesus or not. But it is an invitation, right? So now that we've established this and we do have a beginning, a starting point, now we can explore why our identity is so important relative to our emotional health. Because our identity is how we navigate, right? Take for instance who you are as a professional. Take for instance who you are as a child, right? So this is in any capacity. The other thing I want to say about emotional and experiential languages is for everybody. So it may look different if I'm speaking to a younger audience, but it doesn't matter if you're an adult or a child. EEL is a framework that can support you in your journey of living emotionally healthy. So identity, going back to identity, how we operate. Why is this important? Because how we operate determines how we are. How we are is not who we are, but how we operate determines it, right? So I'm trying to connect the dots before I go into the actual conversation that we're going to have, right? So when you think about your identity, what comes to mind? And the thing that I want to facilitate around that is the awareness of EEI. So think of current right now, today. Now remember, let me go ahead and interject again. I always want to remind you all that this is a safe space. I have made a conscious decision to be safe with myself, right? But I had to learn that, and I had to discover that, and love modeled that for me, right? So I want to say love is active, love is present, love always provides a way back, right? So if you're with me following along in this conversation, I want you to know that love is present. You're not doing this work by yourself. So this is where we begin to exercise our awareness of love, right? So we have to have a point of focus. So when I'm having this conversation, I have to adjust and make sure my point of focus is on love. And I also want to transfer that to you. If you're following along in this conversation with me, I want you to exercise your awareness around love, to be conscious of love, right? Okay, so we're literally using EEL in real time, okay? So how we are is rooted in how we operate. So that's always going to change. Remember, every experience triggers an emotion. We navigate our reality and experiences. Information is always present, right? And so whether, think about what you subscribe to. And when I say information, think about what you believe in. Think about, I'm trying to think of an example when I say information, because it's literally the idea of like everything, right? So just think about when you say, when you take your identity into account, just think about what accounts for it. And think about how that was actually established, right? Think of your experiences. So when I say, okay, I got it. It took me a little while, y'all. This is a lot to articulate. It's a lot to articulate. On paper, I'm way better on paper. But when it comes to like speaking it, I have to fight against my own fear. So it's a lot. So y'all have mercy on me, okay? But the flow is inside of me. And I can't wait for God to just be like, let's go. But in the meantime, I'm going to just keep showing up, right? So every experience is going to contain information, right? And the information is something that we have to take personal responsibility for subscribing to or not subscribing to. Now, we already established why, because all of this is filling our person. And whatever fills our person accounts for how we identify, because that is in our person. So it doesn't lay dormant inside of us, right? That is why living emotionally healthy is all about voluntary participation. Personal responsibility is going to empower you to participate. But this is not something that is forced. This is not something that is imposed. This is a conscious decision that you make. And the natural byproduct is your awareness of the choices that you have, right? And so the baseline is going to be decision, right? Because living emotionally healthy is going to make you a decision maker, right? That's the natural byproduct. And so now that we have this established, I wanted us to kind of have a starting point, like a beginning, right? We have Genesis. Because we have Genesis and the spirit of EEL, we learn that we have an origin. Just like there was a beginning, we have a beginning. Why? Because love is always facilitating our awareness. Love is always teaching us something. And so our experience, that is the value of our experiences, right? We need practice. We may not get this on the first try. We may not even become aware of it on the first try. So that is the value of our experiences, right? They become a training ground where God is facilitating our awareness. And in the spirit of a right relationship, we're always having an exchange where he becomes the point of focus, right? Love is something universal, and I use love and I say love because love is something that we can all relate to. But we make it relative to ourselves. We don't make it relative to God, the source of love. And I believe that is where we're missing out on the power, purpose, and impact of love to sustain us emotionally. So part of what I'm advocating for is how we can learn to relate to love emotionally when we make it relative to God, not to EEI, right? And so we have a direct baseline, something that doesn't change, something that is consistent with the nature of God, which is how he describes himself. So it gives us more to work with, okay? I hope I didn't sound all over the place, because I want us to have a starting point, and that is why I've established Genesis, origin, identity being our compass. How we operate determines how we are. Once we take personal responsibility, we understand we're becoming decision makers, right? But we have a point of focus. Love becomes our point of focus. So we're never pulling from EEI. We're always pulling from love, right? And so we're always empowered and we're always exercising our capacity to stay conscious and aware of love, right? Okay. So I'm going to kind of close with some anchoring scriptures and some glossary key terms. So when I come back and kind of finish up, I can expand more on how to exercise ownership of your identity. So that is why I kind of went over this. The whole idea is, how do we start exercising ownership of our identity? And what is the value of it? The value is rooted in our emotional health and our capacity to live well. And ultimately, most importantly, have a right relationship with love, right? Okay, so anchoring scriptures, Proverbs 4 verse 23, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. That is the foundation of emotional awareness, guarding the system that governs your life, right? And I have like an exciting conversation around that. But the next one is Colossians 3:14, and over all these virtues, put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. Alignment, love as the dominating system that orders all others. So it's so important for us to understand having a beginning, right? It's so important because when we think about how do we even realign ourselves, where do we start with that, right? And so if we understand that we ourselves have an origin, but everything that is filling our person is always pulling us together or pulling us apart, right? And so that is the function of love, because love is like a light. Love is how God describes himself. So love becomes the way that we can go into our person without being disconnected, right? And love becomes the way that we form language to speak back to the emotions that want to be heard. And that becomes a relationship. You learn how to relate to your emotions versus becoming them, right? And so the expression becomes you now learn to express what you're observing from love. So you're not reflecting the emotion, you are reflecting who you're becoming in essence in real time, right? So then the other one is 1 Corinthians 13:4-8. Love is patient, love is kind, love never fails. Think character. Expression that mirrors the system of love, right? So we're no longer mirroring, we're no longer reflecting, I'll say, EEI. When we make a conscious decision to agree with love, personal responsibility, that's the first thing, decision. That becomes the baseline, parallel with love, right? We're no longer going to our emotions, experiences, and information for how we identify. We're going to love. But now that demands participation. So we have to understand being conscious of love empowers us or develops our capacity to see how love is. That is why Jesus came. He is the tangible expression of how love works, because we need a model. And from the beginning of time, God is facilitating awareness around who he is, but beyond who he is, how he is. And that is relational, right? And so that is the value, purpose, and power of a right relationship with love, okay? Moving right along, John 15:15. I am the vine, you are the branches. You will bear much fruit. So this is relative to connection, participation, and engagement that produces fruit. The subsystems formed through expression. So I'm going ahead of myself, but like I said, these are the anchoring scriptures for the conversation that I want to have around exercising ownership of our identity. Some glossary. These are the key terms, okay? System, a structure of order or operation, how something functions and relates. In this teaching, a system represents how our inner world connects to our outer world. Love is the dominating system, the original order everything else flows from. So again, I'll say love is active, love is always present, love always provides a way back. So we want to exercise that awareness. We want to be conscious of love, right? Oftentimes we're more conscious of emotions, experiences, and information, and we're reflecting that. So this is where we make a conscious decision to align ourselves with love, but then we shift our focus from EEI to love. So we're no longer reflecting this because we're no longer more absorbed in EEI, because we're developing our capacity to be absorbed in love. Like Colossians said, we put on love, which has the power to bind every other virtue in perfect unity. So everything that we're learning, everything comes together inside of love. So this is where we learn how to operate from love. We have to be inside of love. And it starts with a conscious decision, right? But then we get to that translates and transfers into everyday life. So it doesn't just stay here, right? This is something that you learn to use in the way that you just make decisions or choices. So moving right along. The first definition, the first term we went over was system. The other one is subsystem, a structure created within a system through participation, formed by our choices, habits, and relationships. So think of our identity as the anchoring system, but love is the dominating system, right? So in essence, we're kind of like a subsystem from love. Now, this is after our decision, right? We have to make a conscious decision to agree with love. And agreeing with love is not the absence of, how can I say this? When you make a decision to agree with love, that doesn't mean that you're going to always reflect the love. But your agreement never has to change. Just like your decision to exercise your awareness of love, that never has to change. Whether you're in a good space, bad space, confused space, wherever you are, however you are, your consciousness of love never has to be disrupted. Now, will you be disconnected from love? Inevitably, yes. If somebody knocks you out, or take, for instance, you find yourself in a season or a relationship or in a space where you're just not relating to love, but your capacity to speak, express, love is active, love is present, love always provides a way back. That's something that you can always exercise. So the example of somebody knocking you out wasn't the best example, because if you're knocked out, you just better have faith in that decision that you made that is functioning, right? Just have faith that you believe that love is always active. But a better example might be the understanding that something as simple as a thought can disconnect you from your value system, right? And when I say value system, I'm speaking of that decision of agreeing with love, right? And so we already established that the value of that is our emotional health. So that's always being assaulted, good, bad, and ugly. But what you learn to do is maintain agreement, because you understand agreement doesn't mean that you're always operating from agreement. Agreement is a conscious decision that you understand love is true, and you maintain the integrity of believing in love, because you also are taking into account EEI, which is always assaulting, is always present, always having the capacity to either form you, towards love or pull you away from love. The other definition I'll use is expression. We have a few: expression, engagement, participation. So expression, the release of what's active within us, how we speak, act, build, respond, and create. Expression is the language of participation. It reveals what system we're operating from. And from the beginning of time, love has been expressing itself. And when Jesus came down, when Jesus was born, and that is where we began to see love in real life, in real terms, right? Jesus is love in the flesh. So we always have a model, we always have an example. We're not navigating this process of living emotionally healthy without the how-to. And that is my mission. That is what I'm advocating for. That is the support. That is what I bring to the table. We may know what, but how to sometimes becomes the missing link, right? But if we're no longer absorbed in EEI more than we are in love, then every experience has the capacity to develop our character. So we're no longer being identified, right? We're no longer having to identify with our experiences, because every experience is an opportunity to learn how to relate to love, right? And we need a model. That's where Jesus comes in. We need to know how to do that, right? If you're a believer, everybody in the Bible represents a way for us to relate to Jesus, because they were human beings just like us, right? And they had to discover Jesus just like we have to discover him. And so this is where the word of God becomes functional, right? And we start to operate not just in knowing it, but seeing how Jesus is manifesting himself, right? And so that becomes our language to speak back to the emotions that want to be heard, that we're oftentimes becoming, because we don't have the capacity to relate to them when we're not operating from our origin. And that is the established origin, the decision. When we're not operating from love, we don't have the capacity to relate to our emotions. But when we make a conscious decision to operate from love, then we have a baseline, because now we're not pulling from our past. We're not pulling from our future. We're not pulling from a book. We're pulling from an actual person who describes himself as love. The last one, participation. I still have more. I have two more. Participation, movement in real time, involvement with what's happening now. And I think I skipped engagement. Engagement, active connection. The moment we enter participation reflects willingness to show up consciously, aware, and present. Engagement transforms awareness into action, right? So I still have a lot more. I'll close with the teaching summary. Exercising ownership of our identity looks like participation in real time. That participation shows up as engagement. Engagement manifests through expression, and our expression is always creating, establishing, and designing what contributes to our emotional well-being. How do we know that our expression has the capacity to do that? Because from Genesis, love has modeled that. Love created the world. How? Through expression. And God spoke. That is a form of expression. And when he spoke, we can see the evidence of what he was expressing, right? Think of the fruit you eat. Think of the trees you look at. Think of the people that you connect to, right? We were all created, right? And so if we are operating from love, then our experiences develop our capacity to do that, express. We express to God. So the expression is not towards anyone. The expression is towards God first, right? Because if you're looking to him as the author, then you understand that you're always learning and gleaning and developing your capacity to reciprocate. Now, how does this translate into our everyday life? If we have the capacity to create, establish, design, whatever contributes to our emotional well-being, because we're operating from love, which is our baseline. So remember, we're not pulling from EEI. We're pulling from love. And because we're pulling from love, we are reflecting how love is, because this is a unique experience to you, right? And this is what relationship defined in EEL as a connection, having an exchange. This is what it looks like in real time. So we have that. The hierarchy of systems. Love is the dominating system, our person, the active system, expression, the subsystems. So the dominating system is the original order of where everything flows from. The active system, which represents us, mirrors the order of love through participation, right? So if our point of focus is love, then we are developing the capacity to reflect how love is. That also becomes the language to engage our emotions. Expression, the subsystems, the order of inner and outer life formed by expression. This goes back to the idea of us having the capacity to create, establish, and design whatever contributes to our emotional well-being, because we are pulling from love. We're pulling that information from love. We're no longer pulling from emotions and experiences, which translates into information, right? So we're not pulling from that information. We're not pulling from this baseline. We're now learning how to pull from this baseline. And that is rooted in our conscious decision to agree with love. That is the origin of our identity and love's power. But we don't come in with that. We come in with EEI. So I want to highlight that. In my next video, I said, I'm still working on this, y'all. But on my next video, we're going to review this. We're going to go through the flow of ownership, the hierarchy of systems, and I will close with an anchor thought. Our expressions are never neutral. They either maintain the systems we've inherited or create new systems that reflect love. Now, what are systems? Systems can represent our person, right? We are a system. And think about what we have the capacity to create. But is it reflecting EEI or is it reflecting love? And the good news is every experience gives us an opportunity to develop ourselves, our personal growth, and most importantly, develop a right love relationship with God, where we learn how to relate to God emotionally. And I hope this helps. If y'all want to partner with me or know how to support the movement, the mission, go visit Shea for Him and Her Boutique, where you're going to find handmade natural products for men, women, and children, all natural moisturizing system. I look forward to connecting with you all soon. I've said a lot, but I wish you all well.